Uh, hey, this is Nate. This morning I'm here with my friend Jess, who is the platonic form of an evangelical. Like like seriously, no one would have any complaints about evangelicals if they were all like Jess. Let's my first question for you today is how do you get to be so awesome?
That well, I appreciate the compliment, but I don't think I'm a typical evangelical, but I have to kind of I don't mind the title because
No, platonic form. So
the
you are that
the
which
pure.
the other evangelicals are failing to, and that if they're being drawn toward.
Oh my gosh, I think all right, we should end the podcast right now. We've gone too far. It jumped the shark. um well, I don't know, like my whole sort of experience with faith and was all through evangelical situations. So it's kind of like my culture and where I grew up in, and there were good things and bad things. And I'm having to, I had to deal with a lot of the shortcomings that evangelicalism has. But there's also plenty of open space for God to speak in and reach out to you. So, and that's what happened to me. So, um, yeah. So no hate against evangelicalism.
Oh, I was raised evangelical too. I mean, well, it's charismatic evangelical,
Yeah, me too.
Assemblies of God. So, um,
Yeah,
I
because
think.
there's like the
Go ahead.
charismatic side, and there's like the more um what is it, literalist, legalistic side.
Right. Yeah.
And I grew up on the charismatic side too.
Right. Yeah. Me as well. And I think here's the thing see this strategy with your experience. It's like it seems like it feels like and from the inside to me, it always felt like it was a very internally closed system. Like to an evangelical Christianity just is Christianity. Not that
Yeah.
they don't know that there are other forms of Christianity, like technically. They might know you might intellectually know that Catholicism exists or that Eastern Orthodoxy exists or that
Right.
the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church exists, but you don't. But it's like your default framing for thinking of Christianity is evangelical Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is a world in itself. And like that's part of the problem is like there'd be moments, like whether it would be like with a coworker or someone not in that world, where I would somehow we'd get on the conversation of religion or God or something. I would say something that would totally make sense in that world, and then they were just like they didn't understand it. And like, what is that feeling? It's like it's like you said something and you realize the person has no idea what you're talking about, and it's not because you're not saying it right. It's because like that whole concept is like foreign to them, and you thought that that was like a universal concept that everyone
Right.
in the world kind of had an idea about. And
Yeah. Right. And there are other things. There are deeply Christian concepts that go very far back in the history of the church that evangelicals also have no clue about.
oh right, yep.
So it works the other way. And I was thinking about this in this. It didn't actually come up when we talked about it, but when I was thinking about the John Vervaeke, Paul Vanderklay conversation, the most recent one, I'm like,
Hmm.
I know, like John says that his Christian upbringing was fundamentalist, so I would say that probably maps onto evangelical, at least like pretty closely. And I'm
Yeah,
one, yeah, and it's
or
like
at least like Baptist or something.
he's kind of like he's intellectually aware of like Eastern Orthodoxy and is engaged with some of its thought, but I don't think he has any experience of like what those other forms of Christianity are like from the inside. So I think they're actually just kind of like beyond his conception to
Yeah,
because of
well,
that, because of that limiting of being brought up in that evangelical frame, which is so all encompassing. It's like it makes it very hard. Um, like I had
yeah,
to find my
and there's a lack of practices in
right,
the evangelical side, which I'm just like learning about now as far as like orthodox practices and stuff, where you know John goes off about how his Buddhist and sort of meditative practices have really helped him, and and thinking that there's no not realizing there's this whole section of Christianity that is all full of practices like that he's
right.
never encountered. And so he's just sort of like, yeah, because that
Although
came up some.
he is doing Lectio Divina, which is a very old Catholic practice.
Oh, right. But that's all new to him, right?
Right.
That he just started that.
Yeah. He uses the same Bible that I do. And
Oh,
I've been doing Lectio Divina like every day for about 2 years now. And also use David Bentley Hart's New Testament.
oh, really?
Yeah. And it's funny, like John made a comment about how and he meant this in a good way. He said it made him realize like just how strange the text is, which like David Bentley Hart's translation will do that for you because he is he called it a piteously literal
Hmm.
translation from the Greek. And so like it kind of it brings a little new life into the text because
Interesting.
of the way he's translated it. It like I think it gets you closer to the original meaning of the actual text, in my
So
opinion.
David Bentley Hart did a whole translation of the whole New Testament.
Yeah, he did
Wow. I didn't even know that.
on his own, like
From the Greek.
as a solo project from the Greek. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And he's getting there's actually a second edition coming out because he's like so his entire argument is that translation by committee is stupid because translation by committee doesn't understand how translation works. That
Hmm.
translation is more of an art than it is a science, and to think that it can be done like procedurally by a committee misunderstands the work of
Right.
translation. And so he took it upon himself to do the entire New Testament on his own. He's not the first person or the only person to do it, but I think N.T. Wright's done his own too.
Oh, really?
I know he certainly criticized David's. They had a lot. They had a lot of argument back and forth, and David won every argument from my point of view. But and not N.T. Wright is awesome and N.T. Wright is brilliant. But
Yeah.
um, uh, nothing against N.T. Wright, but I just think he see there are things that he has blinders on certain things. I think.
Right.
And then but so his second edition, he says he's going to basically like translate the things the way he wanted to in the first place, where he was held back a little too much by like previous convention of translation. And he's like, nope, I'm just going to. This is what the Greek is, and
Oh,
I'm going to render it the way it is, and
right.
let people freak out. So
Let let people freak out.
he actually wrote like he gave a preview of what's coming in like in one of his he calls it a newsletter and not a blog, but
Yeah.
his leaves in the wind where he actually talked about it. One of his translations where he's retranslating Paul in Romans.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still need to go through Romans again with my new eyes because the whole Romans road thing, um, kind of breaking down the gospel into these into these propositional things. Like, here's the gospel in 5 sentences. Like, oh, okay. Kind of
Have you
like,
watched any of Paul's Sunday school classes that he's been putting up on his
no.
main channel for Romans? I've been tempted. It's like, well, you put them up there.
But I went through, I read through what it was like Romans 9, 10, and 11 or something. Uh
Right.
keeping There was one thing I kept, who was I talking to? I can't remember, but there's stuff in Romans that I've never seen before that was like popping out at me about the well, it basically ties into universalism, and because
Yes.
Romans seems to be like the go-to book for people trying to be like, all right, God's going to have this judgment and then everything's going to be and um and this is the eternal results that will never be overturned. Where if I don't know if I can remember right, like that there is this sort of kind of talk about that, but then it immediately moves into the community and everything coming back
Because
together
it's a
again.
thought, because that part, that the vessels of wrath part, it's a thought experiment. And he immediately turns. He immediately turns and says, "But this cannot be so," and then
Yeah,
demonstrates.
that's it,
And
that's it.
then the entire rest of the text is completely universalist, like all of the rest of Paul's corpus. Paul
Yeah.
is unambiguously universalist. Like there's no doubt about that.
That reminds me of this, where I'm going through a Bible study in Hebrews, and it's Hebrews 4 or 5 or something, where he says, talking about how you're God's field and the rain comes down and we should be bringing forth good fruit, and if it brings forth thistles and weeds, the only thing good for it is for it to be burned. And then
Right.
he immediately says, we talk this way, but we have better hope for you, and that God won't forget the things that you have done for him, like the good things you did, how you showed love towards these people, how you did this, and how you brought the God, were examples of the gospel. And he immediately does that turn too. But you do have to kind of have that picture of the field of wheat and the field of weeds, and like, what do you do with the weeds? You got to burn them. But like, it's never that whole, and always the burning and destruction language. It's always about purification,
Right. Well, yes.
and it's as much about like, there's parts of me that are chaff and parts of me that are wheat, that parts of me need to be burned off, parts of me are need to be
Right.
will be valuable. So it's not necessarily
Well,
like,
it's what here's the thing is like it's like first of all, none of the universalists I know don't believe in hell, for starters. What they
right,
don't
hell's
believe
real.
is what they don't believe is an eternal hell,
Right.
a hell that exists apart uh from the dispensation of time.
Yep.
That they don't believe in a hell that instantiates into the eternal realm, which is naturally the realm of God. There's nothing is eternal outside of God.
Yep.
Period. To be outside of God is to not be eternal.
Yep.
You couldn't be. So, um, if hell is inside of God, that raises like a lot of questions.
Well, there's the whole idea of the refining fire and the fire of his holiness.
So the question is, when is the end? Is the question. So it's like,
Yeah, or
it's like it's like there's because that doesn't actually happen at the end of the end. It can't. It happens like toward the end. It's like so.
right.
So hell is not an ultimate thing. It's a penultimate thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's a penultimate thing and not an ultimate thing tells you that it has no place in the ultimate thing. That
Right.
hell is still it's still a part of this dispensation of time. Now, and I mean, I don't know. It's like, is the prospect of like, uh, of 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 being separated from God until like all of the things that are keeping you separated from God, like through however many eons of time that takes. Does that sound like a pleasant thing?
Right.
Just because it does just because it's not eternal, it's like, oh, no, it can't be just torture. It has to be the most extreme form of torture that we can imagine.
Just
Well, I'm
burning.
serious. That's
Right.
exactly what like they insisted that it must be an eternal hell. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there was one of the things, like, talking about growing up in evangelicalism, like you just never question until finally someone like brought it
Why I stopped being a
to
Christian.
mind.
I'll be blunt about it.
You
That's
stop
why I
being.
stopped being a Christian. I like
I know,
never
I know.
like
I
the
have
words
friends
of
that.
Jesus never lost their appeal to me ever. Not even when I was an agnostic. I would still quote I still read the Bible, I still quoted the Bible. I
Mhm.
still was moved by what I saw in Jesus, but I could not be a Christian because to me, the option of being a Christian and not being an evangelical basically was not something that existed within my possibility horizon.
Right.
And so like that's what, I mean, I had a flirtation with the Catholic Church in the mid 90s, and then I briefly, for a few years, I went back to attending a Pentecostal church when my kids were little
Mhm.
after I got married. And I didn't have my wife was evangelical, so it's like we never even considered raising my kids Catholic. And um uh um it's why my son like wants to be an Anglican priest. Like he's got me
Yeah.
attending an Anglican church with him these days. And it's like he wasn't baptized because his mom was against infant baptism, and I'm agreeable, very high in agreeableness. So, and it wasn't like a hill I was willing to die on.
Yeah.
So, which I know would be appalling from a Catholic point of view, but peace in
Right.
my marriage was something I was what I valued more. And I didn't actually, I mean, at that point, I was basically agnostic again, right? So it's like, um, I because Catholicism still was like, I still was like, you've listened to me enough to know that I would have a hard time with like any orthodoxy. Let's just face it. So, I'm just a
How come?
heterodox kind. Yeah, I'm just a naturally heterodox kind of guy, and temperamentally very Protestant, for sure, without a doubt.
Yeah, what is that constant protesting, having to like.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I find out
Uh,
like I'll even do it, you know, like I'll be in a Bible study or whatever. It's not like a protest, but I'll like, it's always like counterpoint and like point counter, like.
oh yeah, I can remember being in Bible studies when I gone back to the Pentecostal church. I can remember being in Bible studies, like making Catholic arguments for interpretations of various texts, because like my framing was still largely Catholic. So I mean, I for me, it's like I just have a natural contrarian streak.
Yeah.
Um, so that's part of it for me. Part of it is just personality and temperament, and then I think part of it is just like just being an American.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
like,
I'm like very, very high in agreeableness too, but I'm contrarian all the time about
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
And I don't like when a bunch of people are doing something, I just don't like it anymore.
right. But here's the thing: because you're high agreeableness, I'm sure that contrarianness that tends to manifest itself in people that are at a further remove from you,
Hmm.
more so than the people like you're not contrarian with your wife and your kids. I'm betting.
Um, when I'm trying to be a little bit snarky,
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'll do that too.
but like not seriously.
Right, exactly. Not seriously. Whereas if it's like an external group, it's like I can be very, very contrarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or and especially like if I'm I and the other thing is like if you're trying to like lead something, like you can't lead and be contrarian at the same time.
No.
Like you have to basically let someone else lead and then you kind of sit over here and then you can do your contrarian thing. But it's
See, this is interesting that you say that, Jess, because it's like, so in addition to being a contrarian, I'm also a natural leader who's always trying to stay out of leadership positions. And I'm wondering if it's like not that contrariness that's
Right.
That causes me to do that, because I know that if I'm the leader, then I can't play my game.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing is like I will. It's not quite to the level of like self-sabotage, but I'll like I won't believe my own grift, I guess. Or I'll just assume that I'm the so like I work in video production,
Right.
and so there's a joke of like if I'm like if someone else is in charge of a project, I'll meet deadlines and all that. But like if I'm in charge of a project, like I set a deadline, I'm like, I know the guy who set the deadline and he's full of shit. So I don't know. That deadline means nothing. But you just assume that someone else, when they set a deadline, that it's like it's it's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I'm constantly like I mean it's part of the reason why like I like to think deeply about things is I'm always questioning myself, like
Hmm.
until I get to like,
Yeah, that's the thing. That's good. That's good that you bring that up too. And me too. I think that's part of the part of it is like part of what causes that is just like it's not like it especially since we're both high in agreeableness too, it's really just comes out of a genuine questioning nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what really causes it. It's just like that I have a it's a natural suspicion of when people assert something with certainty, I have a natural suspicion. It's just
Right.
like, really? How are you sure?
Right.
How do you know for sure? Really?
Well,
So,
this I've been reading that book, The Ethics of Beauty, and talks about how he kind of lays out and he, he calls it an order of battle, but it's basically like an order of it's a sequence of how you should go about what is it? Um well, the sequence is beauty, goodness, truth.
yeah.
And so he starts with he says beauty is the most important thing. And through beauty we learn what goodness is, and by knowing beauty and goodness we can then know the truth. And that's the order you kind of have to go through. And he talked about like it's a really interesting book because in the beginning he talks about um trauma, especially PTSD from soldiers, and trying to do uh, a method of therapy which starts with beauty and then works its way towards truth, because basically the whole modern world, including modern psychotherapy, um does it the reverse. They do truth, goodness, and then maybe get to beauty eventually if it makes sense. Or
Well,
if
that's
they
our
accidentally
culture in
stumble you.
general, though. I mean, our culture in general,
Yeah, that's the West.
we have emphasized truth to the exclusion of beauty and goodness, and we don't understand how they're connected. And that's because, well, this is really at the core of what Ian McGilchrist's work is
Yeah,
too.
it's really
Very
connected.
much because it is not the it is the we don't perceive beauty through the left brain.
Mm-mm.
That's a right brained thing.
Yep.
And the reason and the reason beauty is primary is that, so what we've done is that we have eliminated the important role that intuition plays in our thinking about everything.
Right.
And it is beauty that inspires the intuition. Like
Mm-hmm.
when someone even if it's an idea and it's an like like people who make, groundbreaking discoveries, for example, it's like they'll have an intuition of an idea that they just see as beautiful, and then they
Yep.
pursue it
Yep.
to find out if it's true.
Right. Yeah,
But we
that's
have to
exactly
be
right.
right. So this is why this is important for everything, because the more that we allow beauty to play its proper role and to trust our intuition
Mm-hmm.
about that, the more we're going to do everything better.
Yep.
And I think
Yeah.
that,
And
go ahead.
well, as far as like in the example of like the PTSD suffering war veteran, um basically modern psychotherapy tries to take kind of a truth first approach, which you talk it through, you try to get to the point where you can talk about the situation and go through it. The but the success rate for that is almost zero. It's random. There's people, we don't know how to deal with PTSD with modern psychotherapy.
Can I suggest to you that the reason that psychedelics might be showing some promise in treating PTSD is because of the fact that psychedelics lead to a very profound experience of beauty
Right.
and open up the
And
intuition.
right. I think that's right. And he talks about trying to do therapies where he kind of talks about like old world cultures, and he gave a couple examples that weren't too specific, which I want to know more about. But the one example he said, like someone suffering from like PTSD from wartime experience, they would come home and they wouldn't be allowed to talk about their experience. What they would do is they would be brought back into the community, and so they would eat with people, they would share in festivals and get back into life. Because what PTSD does is it has like a reciprocal narrowing effect. You because of your suffering, because of what you saw, because of what you experienced, um it basically takes all of your attention and focuses on that. And and that's part of the centrifugal force that you're trying to break the person out of. And so at first you have to reintroduce them to the world, and this is connected to like a beauty first approach, like reintroduce them back into life, get them back involved in things. Then after that, then there'll be times when they can talk about it and um you know go through it. And he even talks about the Iliad um being a beauty first approach. He's taught he
Well, it's a poem.
yeah, he quotes this guy who did a bunch of research, but he says the Iliad is actually supposed to heal people from PTSD, from wartime trauma,
Right.
because it
That makes
doesn't
sense
it
to
doesn't
me.
moralize it doesn't moralize either side.
Not at
And it
actually it actually moralizes both sides because you have these tender moments
right, it
with
doesn't have
both.
good versus evil on both sides.
No,
it
no, you
it
have
has the
tender moments with
tragedy and
you
the
have tender moments
heroism
with
and the
Achilles and you have tender
right,
moments with Hector. Like
right,
they're both
right.
presented as fully human.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what is that? That's it. People will be like, well, that's just the truth. No, that's the beauty of of and beauty involves tragedy. And like a beautiful approach is being able to
Right.
see
The
the
truth
whole
about
picture.
Achilles is that he was a violent, murderous SOB. But
Right,
in
right,
that moment, he was fully human and did something fully human. And you could see the beauty of humanity shining forth, even in this guy who was basically just like a murderous rage monster.
right, right. And so he talks about how basically a group of veterans from whatever war it was would get together, and they would spend the week reading through the Iliad together, eating meals and going through this. And that would be a part of the healing process to for these guys, for these men. And I that's such a different approach than trying to like how I grew up, where you're supposed to extract some sort of principles or whatever and apply those to your life. Like what the that it like I've never been able to extract principles and apply them to my life. No matter, like, it puts too much emphasis on my own willpower, which I have zero. I have no willpower because I'm so high in agreeableness. So like what motivates me and what makes me stick to things, or what provides transformation in my own life, it's always been something beautiful. It's
Mm.
always been something that I see and I sort of realize. It's never been, well, now I know this principle, and if I apply it daily, and I've never been able to do that, and it's never provided any sort of transformation or healing for me. And so that's kind of like the main argument for the book, which I think is right. Like, and um, in the West, we got that kind of backwards, and then because we have it backwards with kind of a truth first approach, we're leaving out like a huge part of our humanity, I guess is a way to put it. um and we naturally feel that, and so there's always these sort of ways that we try to cope with that. The evangelical church is trying to cope with that through just show and entertainment,
Well, yeah,
trying to
we
produce
actually
beautiful
have
worship, which they do.
we have a certain elevation of the ugly truth or the hard truth, and I would posit there's no such thing.
Oh, right.
Like, and we think that we hold these things very, very high. And I would say you're talking about something that does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
Because the last time I checked, the transcendentals are always found together.
Right.
So if you found a truth that has where beauty is absent and goodness is absent, you haven't found a truth at all.
Right.
You found something that maybe works, that you can use, that has function.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we ended up with the technocratic society that we have.
Right.
And it is not good and not beautiful.
Right. Look at our architecture.
Right, exactly.
Look at our strip malls and cities. Like we didn't set out to make a beautiful place. We set out to make something efficient and that works, and we did a really good job too. And it's ugly and depressing in ways.
Right. And which isn't to say that the things that we have that we haven't done things that really are highly efficient and really do work, but to apply them with only the consideration of their truth, without considering how they contribute also to goodness and beauty,
Mm-hmm.
is to have a broken society.
Yep. Yeah. And it's not a place you can live. Like,
Right.
if we're trying to build spaces for people to live in, that's not a place to live. It's something else. Like, where are the people supposed to live?
Well, that's a very interesting question.
So
Yeah.
like, I think this gets to like
But I
what
mean,
you've
no,
said before is about like,
actually, I'm actually going to go there. So you say, where are the people supposed to live? And it's like, well, I would say that this entire process is a road to mass dehumanization.
right.
Like that's like that it ends up with, I mean, that's transhumanism is telling you that straight up.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a desire to no longer be human.
Yep.
And you think you're going to become something better, but I would say that yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. And I was just reading this chapter yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind, but he talks about how basically we went through a process where the world, instead of the world being an icon, instead of all creation being an icon of something eternal and heavenly, the world became sort of a dead object.
Yes.
And he even has like this great analysis of what happened in the Reformation. Is the Reformation tried to escape that, but they didn't escape it by getting back to the world as icon, as the world as exhibiting some sort of heavenly principles manifest. They got away from it by oh, what did he say? I'm totally blanking now. They escaped it through basically separating themselves from the world entirely.
Mm-hmm.
So oh man, I wish I could remember exactly his argument. But he has, I, even his approach of writing the book, like like he talks about everything in just such a beautiful way. Like even the Reformation and the Protestants, which he's disagreeing with, he's just like, yeah, I totally understand why they did what they did and the reasons that they did it for. Because
Can
the
you
world,
just for the sake
yeah.
of people who might listen to this, can you mention the book and the author that you're talking about?
The book is called The Ethics of Beauty, and the author is Timothy Petias. Let me.
I can put a link in the description. So, Ethics of Beauty. Got Timothy.
The Ethics of Beauty,
Timothy.
Timothy Petisis.
Greek
I don't
name.
know. Yeah. He
We'll
actually has
spell
an
it.
interview
We'll spell it
with
right.
Jonathan Pajot. He did
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
year ago, year and a half ago.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's interesting. It's like, yeah, this is a book that, yeah, I've like I said, in some of my conversations that I had with James Cortides, he'd mentioned that he was actually going through the book at the time we were having some of our conversations
Mm-hmm.
on Douglas Harding, and he would reference it. So yeah, it sounds like a really cool book. Um, there was something that you said that I really, oh, about the Reformation. So this is interesting. It's like, so so he actually thinks that the Reformation in its beginnings is like, is a response to, so he sees the world being turned into a dead object as predating the Reformation.
Yeah,
Oh, that is very interesting. I would be inclined to agree with him. I think it actually happened
and
with
that's what the reformers. Yep,
Catholic theology in the West starting in around about the year 1300.
yep.
So the Reformation was actually, it ended up doubling down on it and making it worse, but in its origins, he says that it was trying to
Yeah, he even
actually,
uses the analogy. He says basically the reformers chewed off their leg to escape the trap of the dead of the dead world.
gotcha.
It, and um basically the body and the world are just things that um oh, I forget exactly how he said they felt trapped, but then the reformers put a lot of emphasis on the will
Right.
and even God's will. So that creation wasn't any longer an icon of heaven. Creation then became the arbitrary will of the creator.
Right.
And you get into this like what makes the world good? Well, it's because God made it. There's no inherent goodness or beauty in the world. It's its value comes from the,
But where do they think the world comes from?
well,
I,
that's the
that's a
thing is
serious question.
they never escape that the view that the world is a dead thing.
But how could it be? No, but it's like, where is what is the source of the world?
Well, I mean, I don't
Ultimately,
know.
creatio ex nihilo ultimately is creatio ex deo. Like the only possible source of anything
Mm-hmm.
is God, which is being itself. So for our creation, which is properly viewed as becoming, because everything is a state of change and transformation and evolution, and nothing is what it will be
Yeah,
yet, right? But it came forth from God.
yeah, but I think his point, and I don't know the reformers that well, but I think his point was that it comes from the will of God.
Right. Yes,
Creation
this
comes
is
from the will,
right.
and this is the point. So, but then, um, whereas creation as icon means that everything is representing something.
Right.
true and eternal that's within God, rather than just like, I want a rock, here's a rock. The God just creating, and that's how the world dies. It dies in sort of the pure, and it's just the will of God, and
Right.
there's no other understanding of it. And that's how you get to things where it's just like, whatever God wills is good, even if it's burning and
Which
torturing
is
people
to which
forever.
is basically, to me, it's like which is to give to give God it's it seems to give God a gnomic will, like human beings. Like as if God is deliberating amongst options.
Yeah, and then
Uh,
I mean, even the doctrines of salvation for like Calvin was just like, the reason why you're saved is because God wills it, and the reason why they're not saved is because God wills it. It's all just sort of bound up in, um, yep. And then John Vervaeke, and even in this book, he talks about how then the will of God is just arbitrary, because they want to make the argument that like, is God, um is God ennobled to even something higher, that he should, is his will ennobled to something higher? No, his will is the highest thing. So whatever he wills, it's not like, so if he wills someone to be tortured for eternity in hell, then that must be the best thing. So like you, but if you've, you know, this is how, I mean, really, like, I feel like we're, it's like knocking on the door of nihilism
I
and
don't even know, but
and
I'm not quite sure. Here's the thing, though. I
yeah.
mean, like when you use when
And I may not be making the argument correctly.
no, you're no, no. I wasn't expecting us to necessarily end up talking about this, but this is interesting. Um, I don't know when you say will, and I know there's a lot of theology around like the will of God, but I just don't. To me, that's like I don't understand how you think God has a will.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because like to me that's a complete anthropomorphization. Like God is person, yes, but not a person. To me that's conceiving of God as a person and not person. So God like us is a relational consciousness whose conscious existence is experienced through a relationality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So God is person, we are person in that image as a conscious relational being. Will is proper to us as material beings that are finite
Mm-hmm.
because we have to choose amongst options in order to live in the world. God does no such thing.
So it
Like
maybe
God can only be talking about choosing when God is spoken of as choosing or willing, it can only be analogically. It can't be literal. And
right.
frankly, what God has willed, if you want to say God has willed anything, he's willed everything. What has God willed? Creation, which is good, as he declared it to be.
What happened in the 1300s? You said you understood what he was talking about. I don't.
Oh, like
That
so
deadened the
there's like
world.
yeah, so there's like a kind of like that's like so the theological roots, which I think the Reformation took the ball and ran with it, but the theological roots of this sort of like creation of the world of dead objects really begins with um certain Catholic theologians and like actually the 14th century, so like around 1300, so that's 14th
Okay.
century. You have Duns Scotus um uh posits a univocity of being, so that when you say that when you credit when you predicate attributes to God or to finite beings, that you're actually saying that you're actually saying the same thing. And he had the best of intentions with this, but I don't. But it was a move away from the traditional approach, which saw um being as like a gradated hierarchy,
Right.
um and that things could only be said of God and finite things analogically, and that you didn't mean the same thing, that you
Mm-hmm.
were speaking only analogically if you were saying, if you were applying that attribute to God, right? Like we were just talking about will. I don't think God doesn't have like God can only be said to have a will analogically, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing he can properly be to said to have willed is creation. And then everything else, like that's like creation has genuine emergence within it. Like
Mm-hmm.
the creation is created in radical freedom. Like God is the beginning and end of all things. But what happens in becoming? The creation is free to, not just us either. Like there's a freedom in the creation. There's an indeterminacy in it.
Right.
It's being moved inexorably toward an end that has been predetermined by divine providence. So when you speak of providence, really it's the beginning and the end that are providential. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens in between, our agency is 100% at play. And the agency of like everything has agency to a certain degree. Like even particles
Yeah.
have agency. I think everything has consciousness too. I think like a non-atheistic panpsychism, I think, is pretty much inevitably right.
Yeah. That even gets into like Luke's age angelology or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Right,
No,
where
yeah, that's
everything's
right.
mediated through angels. and
Yeah.
and I mean but this just seems like it's um yeah, it just seems obvious. Like even
It
from like
does. That's right. I know. It's like I have a hard time understanding how people can disagree with me.
you could
And
be
not
either
because and not because I think I'm particularly smart. It's just like because it's like none of this is like I don't feel like it's not like wow, I'm smart and I came up with this awesome idea. It's just like no, there's just like it's just a matter of like looking.
yeah, and even
It's a
even from
matter of
like
seeing.
an evangelical sort of charismatic view, like the charismatic side kind of already has some of that in play, at least for
Yeah.
like everything in your life. um God has all these, principalities and powers are at play in, spiritual warfare and um you know participating in speaking the truth and making all that stuff is in there, but then you just have to expand it to just be like, that's all of creation.
Yeah.
The
Right.
rocks, the trees, the river,
Yeah. Yeah.
the stars.
Yes. Yes.
I,
Yes.
I've well, and I always felt like you know the,
But we
there's
do have a we do have a special role to play. Like we're
mhm,
like I like I again like that older like analogical hierarchical structure of being, like our role in that was as mediator. Like we're supposed to be being drawn upward toward
mhm,
theosis, but at the same time we're supposed to be increasing the capacity of person that
mhm.
exists when everything in
Yep.
everything that's below
Yep.
us,
Yep.
to bring the whole creation into the worship of God.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely
So
right. And when so I talk like this, and I'll talk about like, and I maybe will be sort of hinting at it like kind of a universalist direction, like to the the final unification of God with everything. Um, however that looks, unity and multiplicity, whatever. And I'll be heading in that direction. And one of my evangelical friends will be like, that's nice, but it's not true.
right,
And they pull that card, and I I hate it, because
but right,
this is all right. So if you look at it, the beauty, goodness, truth framework, what they're doing is they're flipping it back, and they're
they're
saying that
flipping it. Yes,
beauty is
because
just nice. It's not true.
Right.
It's not, it doesn't hold the same ontological status as truth
But
or
what do we
something like
call?
that.
But what does Christian tradition call the vision of God? Does it call it the truthful vision? No, it's the beatific vision.
I think all us evangelicals are schizophrenic when it comes to this, because we talk out of one side of our mouth about some things and we talk out the other side of our mouth about other things. So we'll have a worship song that's like, there's this one song called The Blessing, and it's only about how the Father loves you, and the Father only has good things for you in store and wants to bless you. This is the
Right.
whole song. And then we'll also, then right after that, someone will talk about how, if you don't believe in Christ, basically your eternity is sealed in this sort of terrible way. Like we're so inconsistent, but the truth is still there, because that song, The Blessing, it has that beauty in it. But it's so often, like, when that is made to be the argument, so like people will say, oh, that's nice, but we need to stick to the truth, which is, what we've sort of systematically produced out of the Bible.
Right. Well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about for a minute, like, what does it mean to believe in Christ?
Well,
Let's
I,
not
I,
pretend that that's let's not pretend that that's like necessarily a simple thing.
I know people don't people don't question that.
Right.
You just hear it every day since you're 3, and you just think that falls into this category of truth instead of the category of beauty first, or whatever. And
Yeah.
well, I've been kind of working on this argument, because, and I wonder if it can be expanded, because there's that book, and I've talked about it in the Voxer, that it's called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so she's an artist and she's teaching art to students. And she got inspired by, she wrote this in like the 70s, this book, and it's called Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain. And it was inspired by a lot of the split brain experiments that were going on. And so she noticed how, people with, like a severed, was it corpus callosum, and then how they handle different things, or people with damage on one side or the other, how they drew things. And so she started putting together basically drawing practices in to teach people how to draw things realistically, because her whole thing is like, when you start drawing, you think you know what you see because you're familiar with it. So, and this goes directly to the point, like, what does it mean to believe about Jesus? We're familiar with it, so we think we know what it is. And her whole point is that when people start to try to draw, like, say, a bowl of fruit, they know what an apple is, they know what an orange is. They're like, yeah, whatever, this isn't strange. Because they're familiar with it, they can't draw it accurately. And so they'll draw a circle for an orange, they'll make the bowl like a half circle shape, when from their perspective, that's not what it looks like. They're kind of drawing it more like, it'd be more like in terms of symbols than how it actually looks. And in order to draw it how it actually appears, you have to let your right hemisphere, your right hemisphere kind of do the analyzing about it. But your left hemisphere is so noisy and so kind of know it all, like, I got this, don't worry about it. Like, I know what an orange is, a circle, yeah, just draw the circle, all right, then let's move on. And then you look at it like, it's all right, whatever. That's the left side of the, but the right hand side of the brain is,
let's give an example. It's like, okay, so when, like, so Paul Vanderklay, who will be known to almost everybody who listens to this,
hi
probably
Paul,
everyone.
maybe
Yeah,
Paul
hi
will
Paul.
listen.
So when is Paul more demonstrating something that could be meaningfully called belief in Christ, when he is teaching on the book of Romans to his
Hmm.
adult Sunday school class, or when he talks about lending his agency to the struggling homeless
Oh yeah,
people
that
that
was
he
good.
deals with. That lending his agent, like that,
Yep.
like right there, I'm lending my agent. That's kenosis.
Yep.
That's what that is.
Yep.
That's believing in Christ. And anyone who does that for another human being is believing in Christ in that moment. And
Right.
anyone who's failing to do that is not believing in Christ in that moment. And all of
Right.
us, all of us are Christians in potency, but not in act.
Hmm.
And that our struggle is to bring our being to bring our becoming into being, right? So
Yep.
to the place where uh we are always acting in accordance with that pattern.
Right. And back to,
And the headspace stuff is just
so
like it
how,
only exists, its only utility is to get you to see that. And if it's not, and if the headspace stuff that
right.
you're getting isn't helping you to see that, then you need you need new headspace stuff. This is why deconstruction is useful for a lot of people,
Right. Right.
because if your intellectual scaffolding isn't helping you see, then it's doing you no good, and it should be broken down in as much as that may help you see,
Hmm. Yeah.
because seeing, it's all about seeing and hearing.
Hmm. And you have to learn how to do that. So
And
so like when
it's beauty that you're looking for
yeah, and
in
when
the
she,
world and in every human face.
right. And when she teaches people, all right, let's try to draw that bowl of fruit accurately as it's actually represented. So one thing she'll do, and this is to confuse your left brain, because if things get too hard for the left brain will be like, I don't want to do it. So if you turn the image upside down, that's one thing. So if you try drawing something upside down, you have to think more about the shape and the lines that you actually see rather than like what you think you already know about it. And the other thing is you draw the negative space around it. So there was an example of like a like a multimedia cart with a projector on it. So she had that in the room, and the student was told, draw the projector and the cart together. And there's like a power cable that kind of went down and wrapped itself around, and there's wheels on the bottom. And I made this comment on Paul's video with Vervaeke, and he said it was really good. So, but it's a great example of, so the student drew it and drew like, all right, here's the projector body, here's the lens, here's the top shelf, here's the bottom shelf, here's the legs, here's the wheels on the bottom, and everything was like all the pieces were there, like all the facts, all the details were there, but everything's slightly skewed. Like nothing's in the correct perspective. It some things were kind of like very crudely like hinted at, like the cord like was just like came down and kind of wrapped itself around you make, because that's how it looked to him. And then she said, okay,
Because the left brain is in control, so it's seeing the parts,
yeah,
but it's not
and,
seeing the harmony of the whole the way the right brain
right.
could.
And so then she says, draw just the negative space, draw the lines around the whole thing. So you have to view the thing as a whole.
Yep.
You draw the negative space around it. Um, and and the she shows the pictures in the book, and it's just a night and day difference. And the one where they drew the negative space is rendered more accurately. And then like after you get that sort of accurate rendering, you can go in and fill the details in, and it'll probably actually it'll look pretty realistic from. And this would be my point, is that if you start with like truth first or facts first or uh the details first, what you end up with is a skewed representation in the end. You
Right.
end up with something that's slightly askew and doesn't, and if you say that's not right, someone can always say, oh no, that's right, because look, there's the cable, and look, here's the cable here. It's a, what's your problem? Like, but the thing is like, if you do a beauty first approach, you do the negative space, you look at it as a whole harmony, it actually renders things more accurately. And I think this is, I mean, I don't know how good of a point this is, but I think when it comes to like systematic theology and stuff, like they may have all the facts right, whatever. Everything's askew though. Everything's skewed, and it's not rendered accurately. The view is not rendered correctly. It doesn't represent how things look. And so what do you have to do is you do like a beauty first approach. So a beauty first approach, when someone just says, oh, that's nice. No, it's not just nice. It's more accurate. Like,
Right.
and and it's accurate from what? Our perspective. And that's how we work.
Right.
Like if you want an accurate representation from where someone stands, it has to be in that order.
Right.
Otherwise things get skewed. And I think I think, yeah. I
Well,
don't know.
one of the things, Jess, that is that, so there's a way in which like there's there's a natural tendency toward a more cooperative element in the kind of approach that
Oh
you're
yeah,
talking
because
about. And I think that's kind of
yep.
what's not wanted, because our society is so individualistic. And it's like, if like beauty isn't something that's, it's very it's very hard to use to wield beauty for power. There are like, I mean, you can certainly like, um, I mean, if you're thinking about beauty in a proper sense, and if you're not, if you're, and if you're like, if you're thinking of, in terms of beauty as a transcendental,
Yeah,
whereas,
but there's always that way in which even if you try to use it for your own purposes, it kind of turns back towards its own purpose, which I would say is towards God. Like
right,
you can never totally, and that's even like Peterson's like obsession with those Soviet
right,
paintings,
right, right,
where he's like they had like a specific propagandic message that they're trying to do that, but then over time the true nature of the painting actually starts to come out, and
right,
he was like messing with that. But yeah, that's totally right. And it is hard to wield beauty.
yeah, it's very hard.
We can behold it, and it's even very very difficult to create things that are beautiful, because like like storytelling, like we can understand stories very very naturally. Like if someone tells a story, like maybe you don't get all the nuance of it, but a kid can understand it,
Right,
what the story is. And but a story is actually a complicated thing. It's actually a woven mesh of like, you know, if we're going to use John's 4 P's, like of the procedural, the whatever the 4 P's are of knowing. So we have these different ways of knowing things: the participatory, the procedural, the what's the other one?
uh, uh,
Oh
procedural,
gosh.
propositional, participatory,
And
and perspectival.
perspectival. So you have all these ways of knowing. A good story uses all of them, and it weaves them all together. And 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 it, being able to tell a story actually takes practice weaving those aspects together. Like
Right,
have a kid tell you a story. They don't know how. They've heard 100 stories and they don't know how to tell a story.
Right.
And you have to practice telling a story. Same thing
Right.
with basically anything beautiful, because beauty is something that's woven together from that incorporates many things. And that always takes practice. So whether you're an artist drawing or painting or making music, music is just layered, woven sound. um Painting and drawing is just layered and woven forms. And so creating beauty actually
One of the
takes.
reasons it's hard in my experience, and tell me if
Mhm.
this like, and you're creative, so let's see if your experience will messes with mine at all. So I haven't really written much in since 2013 because I got really sick in 2013, and it's just like I
Hmm.
don't know, whatever. I haven't been able to find myself. I haven't found. I, Part of it is like, okay, it's complicated. So I got really sick, and I can't really drink anymore because I have gout, and it'll trigger my gout. But it's
Right.
like I used to like but I was a writer, and it's like I was working on. I had a conversation with the role playing game designer Greg Stafford.
Hmm.
He was going to allow me to write a fantasy setting for use with his King Arthur Pendragon rule set, and I was working on like the agreement was all set, and I was working on it, and I was making good progress. And then I got sick, and I was hospitalized, and was like in and out of the hospital for like a several month period, and then I was like really weak and frail afterwards. And I just like, for whatever reason, it's like I never got. And I'd written poetry, and I'd
Right.
written plays, but like writer was definitely part of my identity. And I was working toward like doing something with that, like
Right.
professionally. And I just like I haven't been able to write.
Hmm.
And uh Part of that is that when I would sit down to write, like I like I'd have to have a couple shots of whiskey in order
Hmm.
to get like in order to like shut down my internal editor, in
Yep.
order to just like kind of surrender myself to the work.
Yep.
There's a surrender that is part of the creative process, where you have to get out of the way of it. Like if you allow your left brain to be in control of it, you won't
Yeah.
produce anything. So it's like when I say I can't, like, I mean I can't write anything good. It's like I could sit down at a keyboard and type something, and it would be like, and I could probably write like something that was like very left brain. Like I could write an argumentative essay or something like that still, right?
Yeah.
But I couldn't like to write something actually creative. It's just like I don't know. Like I haven't really found a way. Like maybe I should try meditating before attempting to sit down and write or something. I don't know. But like I it was very much my routine to just like. And what's funny, because like I actually had, like, in college, I actually had a writing instructor for one of my creative writing classes in college, who she said to me, she's like, there's something about like when I read your stuff, Nate, I feel like I feel like just taking a couple of shots of like straight whiskey and smoking a cigar. It's like, funny you should say that, because that's
Because
like
guess what I did
literally
when I was
that's
writing?
what I did before I started writing. In order to get loosened up enough, in order to be able to just like let it come out of me.
Right.
So yeah, so there's like a yeah, there's a surrender. But I think, well, here's the thing though. It's like, well, what spirit was I surrendering to
Yeah.
in that process, right?
Right.
And what was I, and I go back and look at what I wrote, and like some of it is like it's pretty dark and nihilistic, and some of it there are little flashes of things that break through.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's not clear cut. It's actually, that's a more ambiguous. The answer to that question is more ambiguous.
Well, I think, I mean, I'm just getting into this myself because like I have this, I'm so friggin' left brained, and I think I can think my way through this. Even just like having this realization about beauty, I'm like, all right, I got it now. No, no, you don't
Doesn't work
got it.
that way.
It doesn't work
Yeah,
that way.
yeah.
That's the seed of something, but you have, and like, you know, there's something also
You
about
have
it
to
where
practice
it's
it.
like, yeah, it's almost like a body first approach too.
Right. Yes. This is why
So
practices matter, by the way.
yeah, exactly. And that's why they call it practice.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
you you have to build it into your body. That's
Yep.
basically what you're doing. It
Yes.
is like you can watch a billion YouTube
And it's really
tutorials.
hard to just, when you found something that works, this is why it's like, I know probably to people listening to this, it's like, what are you talking about? It's just, you can just like, it's once you found something that works and that
Yep.
where you're able to get into the zone and you like do your thing. And it's like, to find something new, to like a new, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
and
easy at
that's
all.
yeah, but that's the whole process of being born again. And if you can figure out how to
Right.
do it again, you
Yeah.
figured out
Yeah.
the secret to
Oh,
eternal
that's
life or something like
right.
that.
Right.
Like you have to figure out the way to do it again after you've died, died.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. Yes, I understand.
And
But that's right though. But that's really good. I'm glad you said that, Jess, because it's like we do have to die and be reborn like all the time. That's because we are becoming.
yep,
It's not like, and it's not just your ultimate like end of life death, which learning to do that with beauty is what I think Christianity is about,
yep. And
right?
also Christianity is about death is birth.
Right, exactly. But that's not but you're going to die more than once.
Right.
You're going to go through multiple deaths and transformations. It's like,
Hmm.
um uh well, at some point I think I'm going to have a conversation on my channel um with Jed about meditations on the tarot, which is written by
Hmm.
Valentin Tomberg, who's actually like a Catholic, like quite a devout Catholic. And like that's what's going on with the death card in the tarot, right? It's like it's not symbolizing like the ultimate death. It's
Right.
symbolizing that like the need to undergo a transformation.
Yep. It's about transformation.
So yeah.
Yeah. And then so like after you've gone through a transformation, even something like you went through, like your sickness and stuff, like how, like what about you persists? Um, and that's well, that's you. The thing that persists through.
Right, yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, we think we think there's these like shortcuts that we can take through thinking about things, and we can get so far with thinking, but there eventually comes a point where you gotta build it into your body and make your body do the things that it's meant to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. um so, and that's interesting. And other than like, what do you think about like the relationship between practices and evangelical Christianity? Like you're an evangelical, you're planning on staying an evangelical. It's like, do you think that like, what do you think is going to happen with evangelical Christianity in the long term? And it's like, how can evangelicals like embrace the need for practices? Or is evangelical Christianity just going to slowly just fade away? Like, I don't know the answer I'm just asking you.
I don't
what,
know.
what does it
I
feel like from the inside for you right now?
Well, strangely enough, like um it helps people come at least to our church because it's better than nihilism.
Mm.
And it's better
A
than,
lot better than nihilism.
right,
Evangelical Christianity is a lot better than nihilism. I'll be the first
right.
person to say that.
And um and there's interesting moves where things like little, it's small things, but small things that are like liturgical that we repeat. Like in our church, we do communion every Sunday.
That's good.
And a lot of evangelical churches, you know, I don't know when they do communion. Sometimes they
Once
don't
a
do
month.
communion. Yeah, once a month or once every quarter. It depends on how big the church is. But like in our church, we've and we have like a time of confession, we have a time of prayer, and it's all very kind of, but it's always scheduled in the service, so we do it every time. So we have like a little mini liturgy, and people actually really like that. And so there's these like moves towards um these small practices that are that people find helpful. And the thing is like, it just varies from church to church, and churches do kind of whatever they want. And I think we're gonna have to. I think we're gonna have to do more serious practices, because this idea that the main practice in evangelicalism is the quiet time,
Right.
and that's just that's I I've never found it, like having a daily quiet time, forcing myself to do that every day has never been like beneficial. I've never found it useful. And but oh, the other thing that evangelical churches do good is community. Usually they have like good small groups and good, at least the places I've been, um, when it's been good, it's been honest, authentic community. That gets, there's always problems, but um, it's better than nihilism. They got community, and then um, I don't know. There's also another weird idea that's kind of going through my head, that we have actually like modern practices and modern things that we do that we don't realize we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That uh, I think is kind of filling the gap of some of those sort of needs that someone in more like an Orthodox or even Catholic background would already have kind of filled. So it's kind of like, I don't know, trying to be aware of like what we're doing to, and some of it's not, I don't know.
Well, here's an interesting. Here's what so the thing about practices, I would say that the more practices that you have, the less you are reliant on theology to be the thing that unites the
Oh,
community.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like if it's like the center is if the center is the practices, then it's like it de-emphasizes that you and I interpret the Bible the same way, that we have like we have like agreement about the same um uh belief statement.
Mm-hmm.
Like those things become de-emphasized
Right.
because we're still participating in the same practices,
Yep.
liturgical practices. We eat we're we're, we're eating the same Eucharist,
Mm-hmm.
like there's no like it de-emphasizes that, I think, like, which allows for, and I think you have to have that, because like you're never gonna, I don't think like well, life is complicated and people's experiences are different, and you're never gonna have like even people that have like very very similar backgrounds. Like I'm sure Paul has lots of disagreements with other pastors in the CRC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you're never going to have like a theological uniformity, is never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But uniformity of practice is very easy to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And
So
I think a good evangelical church when it's at its best is like lots of people doing stuff together. Like even when it's putting on like a big sort of worship show or whatever, like sometimes some of my best times with Christian people have been like on the tech team throwing cables and setting up speakers and all that stuff for an event. Like the event, I don't remember what the event was. I remember all those times setting up though. I remember all the time, like working with other people, doing stuff.
because you're a part of it,
Yeah.
you're
And
participating directly.
yeah, and so like I think, we think of that as just the, maybe we'll think of that as only the just the stuff that has to get done in order for us to do our gospel presentation or whatever it is, or put on our service. Or for me, I mean, that's kind of like where all the good stuff is like actually working together and doing the stuff, and fixing a building, and that's where um everything is that's where everything is done. Like where all the disciples that's where my discipleship happened in the in-between spaces. It never happened in necessarily, the classroom, and in the church. Listening to
Mm.
sermons was part of it for sure, but like my discipleship and where I like really learned about
What
stuff
do you think
was,
about sermons?
oh,
I know you've given one.
I've given a couple, and I you know I think the sort of exegesis approach is the best approach for an evangelical church, is just trying to just go through the scriptures and talk about them, and have someone that's has some training, from school or whatever, so they're not just like reading something and applying whatever they want. But I hate proof
Isn't there
texting as
something
sort of like,
anti, like that sermon being the centerpiece of the service though? Isn't there something that's like, it's, it
yeah,
seems like it's not very participatory. It's more of like an entertainment sort of a function.
well, it's interesting because it's like one of those things we do together. We sit down and and you like look around and people are yawning and falling asleep or whatever, and uh no one cares if the elderly guy falls asleep. Like it's just like
Right.
we're all in this together, and he falls asleep every time, and that's cool.
Yeah.
And the kid
Do you think
cries.
it's almost better if the sermon's bad?
um
On that note,
I don't know, it's like one of those things where like I like it because it's one of those consistent things. It's a practice that we all do together.
yeah,
And so like the content, like I'd rather it be good content than not,
right.
but it does sort of fall into this pattern, and to pastors sort of chagrin, they're like, are people even listening to me? And whereas like a good balanced pastor will be like, well, that's only part of my role is doing that. The other part of my role is like actually like being involved in people's lives.
Right.
This is part of what I do.
Right.
And you know um and like I like my church, and we're not doing anything fancy. It's just like simple, sort of like we're in the first part of Corinthians chapter 1. Let's read through it and try to figure out what's going on here. And then the pastoral or whoever's teaching, or when I do it, like, because we kind of went through like a little training and got a little handbook on how to do exegesis. So like we're not trying to do like a theme or whatever. You're not trying to teach on principles necessarily, but try to read the text, explain what happened in it, maybe pull out 3 points that are relevant, and or that someone could remember. And so yeah, I do think it's like one of those things we just do together. Like, and it's weird because like we do that together like all the time. We sit in a classroom together. We sit in a church together. We we sit at work and meetings together. Like it's just one of the things like we just do together, and no one would say that any of those times are extremely valuable or unvaluable. It's just
Right.
part of being a person is being involved in just meetings.
Oh yeah, meetings.
And yeah, but I mean, just think of like I don't know. Would it be better if it was like more participative in some way, or I don't maybe.
Well, I was just thinking about like, the difference in like, you can see it in kind of like it shows up in the difference in the church architecture too. Like there's very much like it seems like the more modern, like particularly the larger evangelical churches, they have the feelings of like they feel like they're more like amphitheaters than they are like
Mm-hmm.
temples.
Yeah, they're wanting to put on an efficient production that, where you can change the background for different series and put on the Christmas play or whatever, the Easter,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and you got lights and yeah.
Yeah. None of this is just, I mean, it's just observations. It's like not necessarily a criticism. It's just something that I've noticed. So,
Yeah. I mean, I mean, it's a very like Western cultural thing, and it's sort of like
yeah.
the
And by the way, this is goes for modern churches, like regardless, like it's like
yeah,
large modern churches tend to be this way regardless of what denomination has built it.
yeah.
So it's
But
definitely in a
you kind
cultural
of
thing.
get this feeling like, I don't know, we were talking about the dead world, and then the how do you sort of separate yourself from that? There's sort of that playing on where like everyone's kind of in the dark, and they're just witnessing someone who's truly alive on stage or whatever. Like let's say like a theater performance, like that's what happens. Like everyone sits
Right.
still and quiet, and this is like the,
Well, that's how many,
the
like what percentage of Americans do you think that are look that are going that are going to church and seeing it as yet another, yet another place for them to be entertained?
I mean, I would even see it as acting out that sort of, I see it as, I I think we're acting something out. Like I
Okay.
think we're
Okay.
like it's almost as if we're trying to see that, all right, maybe this is like we're all sitting there in the dark. We're all silent, and we're listening and we're watching for what? For someone to come, and the light shines on them, and then they speak, they sing, they dance, they do something that um separates them from everything else. They're truly alive.
Hmm.
Let's say like, and that would just be like, you think of the the darkness of the theater is the tohu wabohu, and we're all part of the primordial chaos, and then then the logos arises on stage, and the that's almost the but it's very much this sort of modern picture where it's the dead world and the alive person, the alive Christ, and
Mm.
where instead it should be uh like, I think that's important to have, you know Christ as center, but then everything else participates with that. Like the whole
Right.
place should be lit up and full of
Right.
color and beauty, and Christ is a central point, like uh
Like an Orthodox church.
like an Orthodox church. Did I just describe an Orthodox church?
You pretty much.
Yeah, but there's something we're acting out there where we're showing what we believe by what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
No, that's great. So, anything else that you want to say about? I think like beauty has kind of been the overwhelming theme
Yeah, we didn't even
of
get
this
into Job, but
conversation. I know.
let's just
Okay, let's like yeah.
we'll
Tell me how
start an
you see
hour
beauty.
long.
Tell me how you see beauty in Job.
Well, I
Go.
just would, not to be too long-winded, but like he was talking about the Iliad as a book that heals. I think
Mm.
that's what Job is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a book that
Oh,
brings healing.
very good. Now,
And
you know what? It's also the book of Job where the Jewish uh custom of sitting Shiva like drives
mhm,
its
yep,
precedent from. So there's really something there because it's out of the book of Job that that Jewish tradition and practice comes
yeah.
of coming and sitting with those who are in mourning. So
And someone who suffered can uh Job suffers along with them. So like as they would read through the book of Job together, after some sort of tragedy or something that's still affecting someone, um, you go through that with Job, and it's such an amazing book because it takes the side, it takes Job's side. He's like,
mm,
I did nothing wrong to deserve this. I have been denied justice. And you know, for someone who like lost a child or uh is suffering in some other way, like how job job can provide, provide words for them and thoughts for them that they um hadn't been able to articulate, and then go through the whole process with his friends saying like, because the friends say all the things that you think, you're like, well, you must have done something wrong, like either a long time ago, or maybe you were even going to do something wrong and God helped prevent that. Like maybe, and and all that's kind of just struck down. And even when God speaks at the end talking about beauty, like that's what God does with Job. He invites Job back into the fullness of creation, back into beauty, because all throughout that, Job and his friends get it. It's a reciprocal narrowing all the way down to, this is not just, but God is good, and trying to reconcile that fact. And God just blows the doors open and says, and basically just says, look at all of creation,
right,
and invites him to participate again with everything.
right.
And um gets him away from sort of like, because like when you do suffer something terrible, um that does become a focus. You always think about it, you always return to it, you always, um it preoccupies you. And being,
Especially if you're wondering if God is if God willed it.
oh yeah, for sure.
This is
And
why it's a very important to understand that God doesn't will. He willed the creation. If you want to say God willed anything, he willed the creation. And he wills that it be all in all and participating with him in its
mhm,
final state once our dispensation of time and becoming has entered into being. Like so he
mhm,
does, that's the end that's the end he does, the restoration of all things.
right,
But what happens in between, it's like it's it's
right.
not
There's,
God's will.
or yeah, or
It's creation asserting its own will,
it's all kinds.
which does not align with what God wants for it because it is fallen.
But there's this interesting thing about Job, like Job is a transformational process. Job's being born into um a he's being born into another world.
Yeah.
And um so you're like, well,
Well, actually, one of the
does
interpretations
God
I read. Yeah, go ahead.
does God want you to suffer? um i I think that's like the one, kind of the wrong way to phrase the right framing in it is God suffers to bring about everything.
Right.
um and when, you know, it's complicated because it's not like God is like, well, I'm going to do this bad thing, but something good will come from it. So it'll justify me doing this bad thing. It's not like that. It's like, bad things will happen and God will always turn it towards good. And the bad things are necessarily meaningless. They're the things that don't make sense.
Right.
They're the things that, and God doesn't ever give them meaning.
Right.
He instead, and this is talked about in the ethics of
This is
beauty
why the
too.
restoration of all things is the only story that makes any sense to me.
Right. And in
Because
the ethics of beauty,
otherwise,
he talks about how that thing has to find its place. It has to find a home. But when you have that sort of reciprocal narrowing and it's the focus of everything and becomes the universe, it doesn't, nothing else fits in that universe. It's not a place to live.
right.
And that thing has to find a place to live. And so you have to open up the world and this thing can find a place to be. So whatever the tragedy is, and that's part of the reconciling of all things, is everything finds its place.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that, you know, it means tears are wiped away, but it doesn't mean that like the tragedies didn't happen or whatever. It just means that it found its place in the bigger, more beautiful picture, basically.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. So Job is a beautiful story you're telling me.
Yeah, and I think it was a story like you're supposed to read through it with other people and it's supposed to provide healing. I think that's with the gospels too. I think we kind of like think we're supposed to extract principles. I think, you know, the gospel is just the story of Christ. And that story is supposed to provide that for you as you read through it.
I think we lose sight of that story a
Mm-hmm.
lot. A lot of like,
Yeah, we think it's supposed to be delivering us some truth. No.
well, I think here's the thing. Here's what it is. I
I
think
mean, it
it's
does
like
that too, but
I think here's what I think. Okay, what I say, like there's a lot of emphasis on like the end of the story in the gospels without like enough attention paid to the rest of what Christ is doing in the gospels.
right.
And that how the whole work is connected together. I think
Yeah, I think
that's
you're
the,
totally right.
like I don't think we read it that I don't think we read it that way enough, because it's like Christ doesn't ultimately only show like this divine canonic pattern of being like fully on the cross. He shows it on the cross, of course, but it actually shows up in every aspect of his life and ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think this idea that we're supposed to read it as a work of beauty first, and then
Right.
later get to the
But
truth of it.
that's right.
And his life
Yes.
is that. His life is beautiful.
Yes. Yes.
Primarily.
Primarily.
Right.
And that's why, and it is the beauty of it. And we need to understand like when it comes to the truth part of our brain, it challenges that. It challenges
Yeah.
that. Like,
Because we think we know. It's our
right.
left hand side of the brain. Like, I know about that. Believe in Jesus. I know about that. I know about how.
Well, or even if you're not believe, even if you're from a
Right.
for
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
non-believer, it's like, wait, I'm supposed to believe that someone, came back from death.
Right.
Like, but they'll still see the beauty.
Hmm.
And so it's the beauty that we need to emphasize.
Right. Because even
It's
the most diehard materialist atheist still likes Harry Potter and Star Wars.
right, exactly.
Like, what the hell? It's they're
Because
compensating for something.
the story is so beautiful, we keep telling it over and over again
Yeah.
in different forms.
Yeah. And the beauty of the story, like it that's the only story we have. It's that whole U-shaped journey.
Yeah,
All stories are the same. It's the same story. And it's the thing that strikes us as most beautiful.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for joining me this morning, Jess. I
Yeah.
should
Thanks, Nate.
I gotta get ready for work, but
Me
this is
too.
this is a great talk.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
I'll let you know when I get it posted.
Okay.
All right.